Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Yep, please go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you for attending today's webinar, The Benefits of Pharmacist-Led Clinical Trials, presented by RxE2. I'm Jennifer Seaton, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Our speakers today are Gerald Finken, CEO, RxE2, Tina Schlett, Vice President of Pharmacy Operations, RxE2, and Yov Grinstein, Chief Product Officer, RxE2. You can see their full bios on the left side of your window by selecting the Speakers tab. Just a few technical notes before we begin. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there's no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Time permitting, we will follow the presentation with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using the Question and Answer tab on the left side of your screen. Okay, now let's begin. Gerald, please go ahead.
You can tell I'm excited to get going, right? Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, everybody, because I know we have participants from all over the world. Thank you for joining us and welcome. I'm Gerald Finken, CEO of RxE2, and the goal for today is I'm hoping that each one of you who attend and stay throughout, or even after the first two slides, walk away with something that you've learned. That you walk away with something like, I didn't think of that. That's interesting. I want to learn more. That's the goal for us today. So what I want to think about as we start, the first question you should be asking, like, what is pharmacist-led trials? Well, it's not complex. It's going to be very simple. What we're doing at RxE2, and when we talk about pharmacist-led trials, because it isn't just going to be RxE2, we're talking about creating the healthcare triad of the patient, doctor, and pharmacist. Now, that's not unique to the world, right? In the commercial practice, that is the healthcare triad that exists. It's been there for hundreds of years. But if you think about clinical research, does that triad exist? This is what we're doing when we talk about pharmacist-led trials. We're bringing the pharmacist into the team, to the healthcare team. And of course, we believe the pharmacist will play a key role. Now, when I talk about pharmacists, RxE2 pharmacist-led clinical trials, the key is that you can have the triad, but what you really need is the platform for everybody to work from. And everybody understands, the training, the processes, the simplicity of the application, and that's what we bring as a service, as part of the service, as part of this technology. And of course, it's Habitu, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, our technology. So as I promised, I read a lot of articles. We all do. Every day an article comes out on decentralized clinical trials. And I picked out 6 things that I read about, but what happens is, like, whenever I read about decentralized clinical trials, everybody says, oh, we're going to get diverse. Diversity is going to be included. But then they don't, the articles don't go into it, I guess because they want to be one pager or so, but they'll say how. How exactly are we going to be doing this? And what I want to do is show you through examples how we're going to do this. Now, we're only going to spend 5 minutes per topic, and so it's kind of going to be like speed dating as we go through this. We have 5 minutes to talk about what could be its own little webinar in each one of these areas. So I hope we do it justice. Right? As I said, I'm Gerald Finken. I've been in the business for 40 years. I started my first rotation when I was in pharmacy school in 1981. So I've seen just about everything. And I guess, like some people say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I keep trying to learn the new tricks because I've seen an awful lot during these 40 years that I've been involved. Also, joining us today for some of the topics is Dr. Tina Schlett. She's now the Chief Pharmacy Officer. Announcement will come out. We just promoted her. Very pleased to have her on board. She has over 20 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry. Most importantly, she's the expert when it comes to the pharmacist role in clinical research. And she actually created the CTRP concept, the Clinical Trials Research Pharmacist concept, 30,000 patient calls, 2 NDAs under her belt. Again, we're very pleased to have her as part of the team. Next is Yoav Grinstein, our Chief Product and Strategy Officer. He has over 10 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, where he worked at Teva, ran the whole clinical supplies and innovation, led the team on innovation. More importantly, he founded Habit2. And so remember I said about our technology, and if you looked in the press a month ago, we announced through Fierce that actually RxE2 acquired Habit2. So we're just very pleased to have him as part of the team and their technology on board. So let's move into the fun part of this. So, can you read the question? What is a community pharmacy? Do you have that image? What are you thinking of? The second piece of that is, what does a community pharmacist do? Do you know? I remember the first time I was told about a pharmacist, I said, what's that? Of course, I was 18 years old, but like, what's that? I knew what a doctor did, but I didn't know what a pharmacist does. And this is what we want to maybe help you with. And when I say that, what does a pharmacist do? Do you think of one thing? Can you think of 3? Can you think of 10 of what a community pharmacist does? Let's get into it. Community pharmacy, when we think about that, there's 88,000 pharmacies in the U.S. Again, most of this information will be focused on the U.S. today. There are 39,000 chain store pharmacies out there. And to be honest with you, that's what most of us are familiar with. They're chain pharmacies. They run a little bit different culture than the independent community pharmacies. The other thing is there's 26,000 hospital and long-term care medical clinic pharmacies. Most of us have really no idea they even exist, but in the bottom of every hospital, there's dozens of pharmacists working away on all the IV and dispensing medications to the hospital, et cetera. I know I worked there for several years in a hospital pharmacy. It's quite a different culture. What I'm talking about is the 23,000 independent community pharmacies that are across the country today that do an unbelievable service. So traditionally, of course, back in the 40s and 50s, before the laws changed, every pharmacy was owned by a pharmacist. So these are traditionally independently owned and operated by pharmacists. They're located in the community. And 2 things I want to point out, that 93% of their business comes from prescriptions, which means people are going into the pharmacy on a regular basis. Now, the numbers have them going in 35 times a year. This is from the NCPA. 35 times a year, people are coming into the pharmacy. Now, I know I go into the pharmacy 35 times to get my drug called Doug chocolate, but I don't think that really counts. But nonetheless, I'm in the store, I see the pharmacist, I say hi, they know what I'm there for, out I go. It's that area is what we want to focus on today. The other thing, when I say what does a community pharmacist do, there are over 300,000 pharmacists in the U.S. today. 175,000 of them work for chain stores. Again, different culture. Only 55,000 only, but there's 55,000 that work independent in the independent stores. And so I want to move to the right-hand side of the community pharmacists. The first thing all of us should have thought of, they dispense medication. And most of us, that's where we think it ends, right? That the pharmacist is about what they do with their hands. Everything I'm going to talk to you about today is really what they do with their mind. And in this independent community pharmacy, they know their community. They're in the community. And that social economic conditions, the environment, everything that's there. If they're in Texas, they know all about losing the pipes in your house because they're there in their own homes and in that community. They're the medication experts. They're business experts. They're technology experts, right? They know how to run their systems because they're extremely efficient. The community pharmacists have been paperless for quite a while, and I'll just leave it at that. They've been paperless for quite a while. And then this is the key areas, like we're going to say, they provide many other programs. And the key one I want to point out about this is long-term care services. Many of the independent stores have a long-term care facility that they service. And that's an unknown that a lot of people don't know or realize, that they have a home of 20 or 30 beds or several 20 or 30 homes that they're working for. Of course, everybody knows they're doing the vaccinations. And of course, what I believe is that the pharmacists are the key to decentralized clinical trials. So today, again, we're going to do the speed dating. It's going to be 5 minutes a topic. There's the first 3 are critical, and so I put the best first instead of minutes. So Tina's going to do the first 3. Then Yoav's going to jump in and do data integrity and clinical supply chain, and then I'm going to save myself for last, the regulations. Like I said, we're not saving the best for last. We're putting our best foot forward with Dr. Schlecht. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Schlecht. Tina?
Thank you, Gerald. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about 3 topics that I'll cover: diversity, clinical outcomes, and patient recruitment, as Gerald mentioned. And we will start with diversity. So for many years, it's been recognized that participants enrolled in clinical trials were not entirely representative of the general population or of the disease states under study. The FDA has been a leader in the movement to include diverse populations within clinical research. We can go back all the way to 1993 when Congress passed the NIH Revitalization Act that required federally funded studies to include subgroup analyses of diverse populations. Then moving ahead to 1997, the FDA Modernization Act required standardization of data collection on minority groups. From there, it went to 2012, where the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act called on the agency to further evaluate the issue of diversity in clinical trials. 2 years later, the FDA developed an action plan with 3 priorities, and those were: first, to improve the completeness and the quality of the demographic data contained within applications; second, to identify barriers to enrolling demographic subgroups into trials and the strategies to address those barriers; and third, to make the demographic data more readily available to the public. As such, in 2020, the FDA released a drug trial snapshot summary report for trials conducted between 2015 and 2019, and those results are listed here. From the data from approximately 293,000 global participants was included, but the graphs here represent U.S. demographics for approximately 102,000 patients. The reports focused on the demographic characteristics of gender, race, ethnicity, and age, but the agency also recognizes non-demographic characteristics that play a role. As you can see, the U.S. is fairly evenly split between men and women. Clinical trial participants during the time period were primarily white, followed by Black and African American. Ethnicity was primarily not Hispanic or Latino, and age was by and large under 65. Since the first snapshot report in 2015, the results show a positive trend towards increasing in diversity, but a strong effort is certainly still needed in terms of including diverse populations in clinical trials. In November 2020, just a few months ago, the FDA released a guidance for industry on enhancing the diversity of clinical trial populations. This guidance recommends approaches sponsors can take to increase enrollment of underrepresented populations, noting that enrolling patients with a variety of characteristics can more accurately reflect the patients who may take the drug if approved. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see the various suggestions that the guidance outlines. The first being to encourage enrolling patients who reflect the characteristics of the clinically relevant populations, including age, sex, race, and ethnicity, as well as non-demographic characteristics. The agency also recommends including site locations with higher concentrations of racial and ethnic minority populations, and those that are within the neighborhoods where these patients receive care. It noted that by restricting site locations, it can limit the ability to enroll a diversity of participants. And lastly, one of the recommendations is to connect to populations that may have limited internet access, and doing so through community events or trusted locations. These suggestions lead us to ways in which community pharmacists can play a role. The community pharmacists are ready to meet the challenges of enhancing diversity in clinical research and ECTs. As Gerald mentioned, they are trusted healthcare providers serving patients in their local, diverse neighborhoods. They speak the same language, they understand the cultural competencies, and they have a relationship with their patients. They're also available when their patients need them, nights, weekends, outside of normal business hours. They can assist patients who need help with technology, such as using a glucometer, or patients that may have limited access to the internet, such as helping seniors enroll in Medicare, and so forth. And within community pharmacies as a whole, there's an incredible opportunity to serve the public and to educate patients about clinical trials as a healthcare option for everyone. Changing gears, we'll next look to the topic of clinical outcomes and how pharmacists can make an impact in DCTs. Medication adherence is the extent to which patients take medications as prescribed. In clinical trials, non-adherence is estimated at 40%. That's 40% of patients not taking the study medication as directed. Barriers to adherence are complex and varied, and strategies need to be planned and multidimensional. Within clinical trials, non-adherence also has implications for patient retention. The average dropout rate across all clinical trials is approximately 30%. So these two items come at great cost in time and resources to stakeholders. And pharmacists, as medication experts, have the ability to improve both of these statistics and ultimately the clinical outcomes. When I first started counseling patients in clinical research about their medications, I have to admit I was a bit skeptical. After all, these are some of our most educated patients. They've read and signed the informed consent. They've had interactions with the coordinators, the investigators. They've likely received written instruction in addition to what's on the product itself. So they should know what they're going to do when they get home with it. However, what the data showed us was different. And over 4,600 patients and 30,000 patient interactions, we identified that 31% of patients were taking prohibited concomitant medications, meaning that they didn't understand perhaps to stop taking a medication on the inclusion or exclusion list. They might have been taking an incorrect dose of such a medication, or perhaps they visited a local physician during their time in the study and that physician prescribed a new medication. We also found that 36% of the patients had problems administering the study medication. For instance, taking it at the wrong time of day, at noon instead of in the evening, or taking it at the wrong time in relationship to meals. 15 minutes before a meal is quite different than 15 minutes after. We found that patients had problems using a device if one was required, or if they were doing an injection, they may have been administering it in the wrong site on the body. We also found that 37% of the patients were taking the wrong dose of study medication. Too much, too little, or they forgot to change their dose per protocol instruction. Some were missing doses. Ultimately, 92% of the patients we spoke with had at least one intervention that, if left undetected or uncorrected, could have compromised the trial data. This includes the items that I spoke about, plus things such as using a patient diary, storage of the study medication, or use of ancillary supplies, such as reusing ancillary supplies when they shouldn't be, or using their own and testing it against something supplied by the site. So the next question begs, how did we complete these interventions? In most studies, currently, communication is linear. It goes from sponsor to CRO to investigator to the patients and back again. What we did is we connected patients with a study pharmacist who provided medication counseling by reinforcing what was taught at the site, responding to questions, and assisting patients with fitting the study requirements into their daily routines. With a small team of pharmacists talking with all of the patients at all of the sites, weak signals can be identified in real time, and as well as information hidden in the noise. And this knowledge was then shared with the sites and the sponsors straight away so that issues could be addressed at the time and not when the study was closing. On the whole, and in collaboration with the clinical sites, the pharmacist counseling led to more accurate patient data, better results, and faster study completion. My last topic for today is patient recruitment. The Tufts Center for Study of Drug Development Impact Report of January-February 2020, about a year ago, indicated that sponsors were realizing the efforts that were being made to improve patient recruitment and retention. Efforts such as optimizing protocol design, increasing technology, and reducing the patient burden of participation. And then COVID-19 hit, causing significant disruptions in everything, including clinical trials. It is estimated that about 80% of non-COVID trials were delayed or stopped. There were certainly site disruptions as new processes needed to be established, and specific challenges in patient recruitment as patients were hesitant to go to site visits, and the sites were faced with IT issues moving towards telehealth and virtual site visits. Looking ahead, we need to identify opportunities to educate the general public about clinical research, as well as to evaluate new recruitment channels. And one such option are community pharmacies. So to make this happen, the industry can engage the pharmacies to provide educational resources for trials as a healthcare option, as I mentioned earlier. And also, as Gerald described, pharmacists are a trusted healthcare provider to their patients, and they can utilize their existing infrastructure to engage patients in specific trials that might be an option for them. The pharmacist already has that relationship with the patient, so it's not like a new entity that's trying to forge a relationship before the engagement can begin. Pharmacies have remained open, providing standard services throughout the pandemic, certainly making them a reliable partner. Recently, they've also become instrumental in the distribution of the COVID vaccines and are seeing new patients in their pharmacies all the time. Community pharmacy networks can absolutely support patient participation in DCTs. I thank you for your time today, and I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Yoav, to discuss data integrity in clinical supply chains. Yoav?
Yeah, thanks, Dina. Hi, everyone. Great to be here and promote community pharmacist awareness in clinical trials. So let's take another look on pharmacists, but now from the technology side of things. So during recent years, pharmacists became much more tech-oriented, and we can see it in many ways. In the way they moved from manual drug dispensing to automatic one, in the way they embrace medication management solutions as adherence programs that were implemented in more than 90%, or applications and smart devices implemented in more than 75%. Even taking it another step forward using integrated technologies like pharmaceutical care to manage patients' data. So pharmacists already started transitioning from focusing on dispensing to becoming patient health consultants, and technology has a big part in this. So how is pharmacist technology orientation related to clinical trials? So in 3 words, decentralized clinical trials. So decentralized trials exist for many years, and lately, due to COVID, the adoption rate increased. So decentralized trials take patients home and transition it to become another site. As a result, the need to technological solution increased dramatically, and the solutions like telemedicine, for example, that became as air to breathe to trials during COVID, or mobile application and smart devices became the new standard. All these technologies aim to support patients, but during COVID, we need to remember patients evolved as well. Our patients are now more digitally advanced, but also advanced in their approach to handle problems. So technology has a big role in bringing new solutions in front of patients, either in healthcare or in clinical trials. But in trials, technology was implemented to replace past approach with a new one, while less focusing on creating new alternatives to patients like they're used to. In our example, we enhance existing relationship between patients and their pharmacists, but now moving it to the trial setting. So our technology with pharmacist technological skills allows us to quickly onboard pharmacists and create new setting in healthcare, one that can fit clinical trials. By doing so, we create new alternatives for both patients and pharmacists. With this new approach, we can drive implementation of new technologies, tech like AI, artificial intelligence, making use of pharmacist database to identify potential patients, allow large networks of pharmacists to onboard from their healthcare role to the clinical trial setting, embrace behavior analytics to enhance relationships, or to implement continuously changing processes to accommodate the real-world environment, yet still keep its implementation consistent as trial required. But in clinical trials, it's not only the technology. It is also the quality and integrity of data that matters. So in pharmacist world, since every recommendation or medication provided are critical, pharmacists are already used to generate these kind of robust and reliable quality data. Such data may be part of patient electronic health records or consenting patients on various statements. But we also need to know that as a healthcare professional, they are obligated to HIPAA. And through the collaborative practice agreement, they can even interact on behalf of patients. And through these kind of capabilities, they generate different types of quality data. So when connecting high-end technology with these capabilities, it results with high-quality outcomes. Now, in our case, the ability to work alongside pharmacists with technology as AI and behavior science allow to optimize the trial setting. Our technological solution allows to perform trials with pharmacists. So it was developed to enable site management capabilities, enable patients to keep their trial activities, and in parallel enhance their relationship. Our KEEP engine performs the evaluation of data that was generated by both sides, the patient and the pharmacist, analyze it, and react to the different trends it identifies. By doing so, we connect between pharmacists, their patients, our technology, and clinical trials. So to summarize, we can say that enhancing pharmacist technological orientation, current industry technology trends, and digital changes that impacted our patients, all these drive a new evolution in clinical trials. We work to enable the right technology to accommodate a new approach, one that provides alternatives. From having clinical trials as another healthcare option at the point of care, to alternative pharmacists and patients can choose from during the trial. So now, after we understood better the pharmacist technological advantages, let's move to understand more on clinical supply impact due to the pharmacists. So the frequent question we receive regarding clinical supply is, how did the decentralized trial change it? So clinical supply chain is one of those areas that were significantly impacted, and it resulted with a holistic change of approach. The main approach in trials supply chain was built around doing things in a big scale, trying to reduce costs. Things like trying to reduce number of packaging runs or trying to consolidate shipments as much as possible. But this approach also created challenges with patients getting to sites, delays in medication deliveries, increased site medication management support, and low level of flexibility to react to events that happen. When COVID started, it created a major boost to a new approach, one that needs to address the fact that patients don't leave their home and can't really arrive to clinical sites just to get their medication. So in order to keep trials running, various solutions were implemented. The industry tried to do whatever possible to keep studies alive, sending medication to patients directly, sending it to nurses that will bring it to patients, clinical site parking lot delivery, and any other applicable way to deliver medication. As a result, the direct-to-patient model was frequently used, and additional pros and cons for it were identified. For example, it allowed to move to on-demand packaging enablement that can have significant impact on medication utilization and waste. It increased flexibility during COVID days as pandemic and authorities' responses change every day. The ability to reduce visit to sites allowed to increase patient distance from sites, while doing that, creating a bit more simple recruitment path. But like in all changes, one of the biggest challenges was the change in industry. One that is accustomed to a certain way of working and now need to move to a new approach almost instantly. The rapid change created new challenges to clinical supply teams. A few examples. Premium careers resources were limited due to the quick move in all geographies, and now regular careers were used as well, and were expected to address clinical trial regulations. Increasing flexibility while moving from large packaging labeling campaigns to small personalized ones, but in very large quantities, something that requires significant infrastructure changes. Using pharmacy licenses, process, regulations to dispense directly to patients and not ship to a site. The logistics we all know from deliveries from Amazon or eBay, but now with medications and without the option to leave it at the front door. Actually, we introduced patients to a new process. And now we have them managing their own medications, including inventory, logistics. Now they are part of it. So by doing so, we created a parallel trial route, parallel to real life. But it is not only parallel, it is also different from what they're used to. They're used to receiving their medication and counseling on their medications from their day-to-day contact, the pharmacist. To address these challenges and to take advantages of the pharmacist's capabilities, in our model, we utilize central field pharmacy that can manage the inventory and perform packaging activities as needed. This approach brings the medication expert, the pharmacist, to do what they know to do, and that is to manage the process, from inventory to packaging to dispensing, if over the counter locally or from a central field, while following up and making sure the patient receives the medication. The stability parameters were kept and there is no damage to the kits. Also making sure the patient is familiar with the regimen and instructions how to take the medication and how to store them. So this model drives significant efficiencies and cost reduction, definitely due to direct to patient, but not only. It's also due to the change in paradigm. Have pharmacists lead the process. We see how this model is evolving and taking a bigger part in the future of clinical trials. Gerald, back to you.
My mute button is now off. Thank you, Yoav. Thank you, Tina. Again, that's the beauty of this. We all understand what I just said. But, you know, I want to go off script a little bit. And as we said in the beginning, we have several hundred people attending this webinar right now. And off to the left, you can write in your questions. And I'd love to think that we're doing such a great job that there's no question. But I actually come back to thinking about this and like, right now, I'm a pharmacist, right? And you're a person, and you have access to me. You're listening to me. This is a telehealth visit right now. And I don't have a single question from any person, which is what we find most of the time, right, if we don't have a relationship. So it's about trust. You wonder if you send me a question, what is everybody else going to think? You know, is it going to seem like a silly question? You know, what is Gerald going to think if I ask this question and stuff? That gets to the quintessential issue that I think is happening when we talk about how decentralized clinical trials are going to work, this trust. Like, do you trust yourself enough? Do you trust me enough to ask a question, you know, about what's going on? And, you know, so I just couldn't help but looking at that, thinking, you know, we have this, you know, hundreds of people listening and no questions asked. And I'm not naive to think that there are no questions. But to me as a pharmacist, right now we're all participating in a telehealth visit. Now, if we started to discuss your medication, we're going to get into the regulations because then things are going to change a little bit. So I ask, so please ask your questions, or otherwise you're going to listen to me ramble for the last 15 minutes, as I love to do. So let's get into the last element that comes up a lot, and that's getting into the regulations. And when I think about regulations, whenever I see that topic come up, and the regulations are going to be an issue, and it's like, well, what issues? And then sometimes some of the articles do point out a specific thing. But I want to say when decentralized clinical trials, one of the first things that I saw that happened had to do with what I'm going to go over very shortly, and that was with telehealth, just as I just mentioned, is telehealth. I come from a different level, and I think about regulations, and there's various levels. I think about strategic, tactical, operational, transactional. And I think the issue is we're down in the operations trying to work things out without necessarily understanding about how we got there and what governs us. And so I wanted to step back, and I think everybody on the teleconference understands the ICH guidelines and how that organization has really taken over and the quality standards and the standards the world is now following. And if you ever look at those guidelines, those individuals, like when they say that you have to be educated and trained, and based upon some of those guidance documents, it does talk about the physician. The medical care has to be by a physician. But then it does talk about drug accountability as being the pharmacist. And now I have an issue with that because, wait a minute, once a drug gets approved, the pharmacist has to be involved, but yet in clinical research, we have to be accountable, for drug accountability. The other thing is you step down a level more into the tactical, into each country, like the EMEA or the FDA, right? Here again, all the guidance document is training and experience. You get enough training and you get experience, you can perform the function. Now, I don't know too many facilities where, the assessments, right, aren't being done by a physician. But I know why, and that gets into the third piece here, which I think most of us in this room are starting to understand. And that is the state boards get involved, right, the licensure. Right, to practice medicine, you need an education from an approved medical school, you need an exam from an approved examination, and you need to continue your education through CEUs. As a pharmacist, I have to do 15 CEs every year, 15 hours worth of continuing education. So, and this is all healthcare professionals, chiropractors. I want to say even like the beauty or the manicure, right? They're licensed by the state. They have to do the same thing. They have to be educated and then licensed and continuing their education. And this is the key piece I think that's been causing some concern. And I hope that as we move forward that you can separate those things. Specifically with the decentralized clinical trials, this was the first thing I saw because I've been working in this state requirements when we did first direct to patient 20 years ago. I got licensed in all 50 states, and I'll cover that in a minute. But in any case, what I saw first of all is the telehealth. What may not have been understood is that when you're a healthcare provider and you're going to call a patient, you can't talk to that patient if I'm in California and you're in Arizona, or if I'm in New Jersey and you're in Pennsylvania. And that's because you're not licensed in that state to provide that service. So it's where that patient comes. Now, if the patient comes to you and then goes back, you can counsel them because that prescription that you wrote, how that works, you have that relationship. But this is where the companies that do the telehealth calls, they're licensed in the state where the patient's from, or what they do is they give you a doctor who's licensed in the state you're calling from, right? And so that was the first foray into, oops, wait a minute, there's other regulations going on. The same thing is true of home nursing visits. So you can talk about the home nursing visits, which was decentralized clinical trials. Everybody says, oh, this is going to be the solution. Nurse comes in, healthcare provider comes in. But if they're flying in from Chicago and they're not licensed in Arizona, they can't perform a service, right? And you've got to wait. Now we've got to get a local healthcare nurse to come in and speak to the patient. The same thing about drugs, the investigational drugs. If I'm at a depot in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, I can't be shipping drugs to a patient in Wyoming, right? Because I'm not licensed in that state to perform that state regulated service. The same thing is like when I specific about the supplies, which you all went over, which is critical to totally disrupt the system. When we get into this, the DCTs is one of the best things that could have happened to clinical supplies as we move it out of the GMP facility into the practice of pharmacy, getting much more patient specific. So for instance, you're going to send drug to a patient, those medications have to be labeled according to state requirements, patient name, directions, the 13 elements of the state required. More importantly, the pharmacist has to counsel that patient, not a healthcare provider. The pharmacist responsible for the dispensing has to counsel that patient. And so these are things that are going to greatly benefit us and not to be looked at, oh my God, this is more we have to do, but a wonderful thing that's going to be happening with decentralized clinical trials. In our model, the pharmacist-led trial, just like in the clinical research before, it was an issue because why? Everybody is licensed in the local clinic, right? And so if I can do this pictorially, right, when we talk about like the clinic, right, when it was at the main hospital, right, everybody in that hospital, patient comes from whatever state they come from, the hospital, they're all licensed in that state. But now it's decentralized, we're breaking down the state boundaries and saying, wait a minute, anybody anywhere, right, if we're going to go get these patients. So what we like to look about is, in the pharmacist-led trials, you keep it in the community, the actual task in the community, where the local pharmacist, local nurse, local lab, and the patient, of course, goes to the local pharmacy in person, right, if need be, right? Just like right now, do you trust me as a pharmacist that you don't know, right? And I'm one of your telehealth pharmacists. Like, no, but if I was your local community pharmacist, you'd go down and say, Gerald, I just listened to this webinar and this didn't make sense at all. Could you explain it to me? I don't think you'd have an issue, talking to your local local healthcare provider. So when we look at this, and I think about, again, the pharmacist-led trials is bringing it local. Of course, what I come back to is, right, back to the triad that I started with. So here we have the local pharmacist, the local doctor with the patient, and I go back to what I mentioned when I started this regulatory by asking your questions, trust. There's that trust factor. So when I think about telehealth and decentralized clinical trials, nurses coming into my home, I don't know those people, right? And so that's not really patient-centric when we have to ramp up and develop a trust factor in just like now. We get 3 questions, and I wonder, is that because of trust and the relationship? And so that's the topics of regulations. I hope that helps some as from a strategic and tactical level about what you have to be looking at, and then to drill it down into saying, okay, what are the GCP requirements? Of course, what is the COVID guidelines and decentralized clinical trial guidelines, which are pretty straightforward, what they offer. I will give you one more thing to take away, is that this is not like we focus on the U.S., but the same thing is happening in Europe, the same process is the EMEA, then there's the local country, like in Germany, then there's the local landers, who pharmacy regulations for each lander has its own requirements, just like in Canada, the provinces have their own local requirements about how you handle medication and the role of the pharmacist, and even in clinical trials. So in summary, as we're at 42 minutes into this, and we're going to take the last 15 minutes to answer questions, and I really hope you have questions for Tina, because you really, and from the technology side, you have 2 incredible individuals that know an awful lot about what's going on. So my takeaway for you is this, is, the pharmacists are medication experts. We need to get them involved in clinical trials. And the key about this is that the community pharmacists, they're already doing clinical trials. They just have a different name for the different services. So it isn't like we're going to go into community pharmacies and say, listen, we have to teach you this whole different way of doing things. They're already doing this. You talk about like bringing patients in, recruitment, they're already doing it in other services. Counseling, they're already doing it. Dispensing, they're already doing it. Collection of data electronically, like I said, they've been paperless for a long time. E-consent, they're already doing it through other means, through other avenues. And so it isn't like we're going to train these pharmacists. We just have to tweak them a little bit. And now we have, like we said, 23,000 more sites that we can add, and their populations, which is what I always love to think about, is everyone everywhere getting the opportunity to participate in clinical trials. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And of course, now's the time to include your pharmacists, because I don't know how we can move forward with decentralized clinical trials without the pharmacists. So I want to say RxC2 has an upcoming event. Dr. Schlecht will be joining me for one of our live sessions on the 23rd of March. I hope you can dial into that. Follow us through LinkedIn, our website. We'll have that announcement. Specifically, Tina will be talking about all her experiences for the 12 different studies, 30,000 patient calls, what her takeaway was from all that work that she did to get those drugs approved for her experience. So I'm very pleased to be having that coming up. And with this, we're going to start the question and answer. And so hopefully we'll have some more questions, and otherwise I'll ramble a little bit more. All right, so thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Take it away. Let's have some questions.
It looks like your pep talk worked, because we did get a lot of great questions. We are still taking questions though, so feel free to add more as they come up. But we'll go to our first question right now. how open-minded are pharmacists to take on the responsibility of being the central point person for a trial?
Excellent. I'm going to hand over to the expert. Dr. Schleck, do you want to take that one?
Thanks, Gerald. Yes. Pharmacists are absolutely excited for the opportunity. Since the early 90s, pharmacies have been trained with their Doctor of Pharmacy degree, clinical specific skills, and we are looking to practice at the top of our license. And as Gerald mentioned, many of the functions that are already happening in the pharmacy setting can easily be relayed into clinical research. It's just a matter of understanding the nuances of clinical research and applying what they already know. So pharmacists are absolutely open-minded and excited for the opportunity.
Great. Our next question is, what fee are pharmacists getting per patient?
Boy, yes, fees. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to have a live webinar coming up. This is a great question. And Tina, I think I'll handle this, and then maybe if you want to just comment on it. So the fees, when you think about it, the practice of pharmacy has been commoditized, and everything they do has been streamlined. And so RxC2, we're bringing the practice of pharmacy to clinical research. One of the top priorities we have is to lower costs, not to lower quality. So, for instance, one of the things we think about, and I'll give you a number because I don't like it when I ask the question, well, how much is it going to cost? Well, I can't really tell you. It all depends. It's like, come on, you're the expert. Give me a number. And so I can tell you, for instance, we're moving to subscription pricing. It's something we're going to start really looking heavily into to commoditize. So, for instance, for direct-to-patient in the clinical supply world, it's $200 per dispensing, all in. So you get a subscription price where you get 500 patients, and we don't really mind which study you send those patients to, as long as, and this is controlled room temperature, it's $200 per dispensing, all in. No other charges, that's it, right? And we're looking to do the same thing on the clinical side, but we're still working on that pricing. Tina, do you have any, this is an example. So we know it's going to be very cost effective because of the streamlined processes pharmacists already have. Tina, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you did a great summary on that topic.
Great question, and I hope I provided some. I don't have the subscription pricing amount yet for all in, because that's a big nut, but we're working on it. But that's where we want to go, subscription pricing, to make it that simple as we move forward.
Okay, our next question. Yeah, is you mentioned decentralized trials on your website, and that you have a new system to get clinical supply packages labeled and shipped directly to those local patients. Given the increase in temperature-controlled products, how do the central fill pharmacies or local pharmacies handle packaging of temperature-sensitive products and the data integrity of temperature excursion with temperature-sensitive products? Do they use temperature indicators or final mile loggers? So,
Yoav, I know like you've covered this, but like I love clinical supplies. So do you mind if I answer, if I start this, Yoav? And I'm sorry, Yoav. So here's how it works. Think about what the community pharmacy is doing today, right? We're using a central fill pharmacy. It does specialty pharmacy. That's the medications, once they're approved, $10,000 a vial, frozen, refrigerated, are shipped every day, thousands of times a day to the patient. What's happening in the commercial dwarfs what's happening in clinical research. These pharmacies know how to ship drugs at frozen, refrigerated temperatures in a qualified container with qualified temperature sensor monitors. And this is where sometimes I question, and this is of course one of the biggest costs, is that you have a qualified container, like you can't call it validated, right? But qualified, you don't need a temperature monitor. But just in case, we want to have double redundancies, like you get a text message when as well as your password when you go into financial sites to verify. So all I can say is taken care of. It's happening 10,000 times a day, 100,000 times a day in specialty. And the central fill pharmacy that we use, thousands of times a week. that absolutely all that's covered. And like with anything, like we don't know quite the stability, so it'll be product specific, protocol specific, but even still, controlled room temperature, $200 all in. I think it's $250 refrigerated, $300 for frozen, all in. Yo, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that in the network we have, in general speaking, so central field pharmacy, not all of them have the capabilities, but the ones in our networks, we make sure that they do. And as Gerald said and explained in details, when they do, they can do, again, from regular temperature to cold to freeze. That's it.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Are the participating pharmacies performing the blood draws or providing wearable devices?
I just got a chat that told me, Gerald, you need not answer all the questions. Tina, take it away, please.
Thank you, Gerald. Our pharmacies performing blood draws, not at this time. We very much want to leave expertise where it belongs, and certainly the labs and nurses and phlebotomists that are trained to do that, certainly they can do that. Pharmacies do have CLIA waivers in some states and some pharmacies. That allows them to do some testing on site. Otherwise, they're collaborating with other practitioners in their local area. The next part of that question is providing wearable devices. I'm not exactly sure as far as the providing wearable devices, but they certainly work with patients that may be using different types of devices, things pertaining to diabetes and so forth. If a study has a particular device that they are using, the pharmacist is well equipped to educate patients about those devices and help them use them throughout the duration of the study.
Okay, our next question is, how do sponsors or CROs think about your model? Should they have trouble establishing contact with the pharmacists?
Again, Tina, you want to take that?
Sure. Our sponsors have been engaged with our model. I think the industry as a whole are looking for new opportunities and ways to best utilize the healthcare providers within the options that are available to them. As far as establishing contracts with the pharmacist, no, the pharmacists, as I mentioned earlier, absolutely want to participate in this type of model, to have this opportunity, and to practice at the top of their licensure. Gerald, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. That this is where we talk about the Habit2 platform and the scalability, and our pharmacists, quickly to onboard them to geolocations. I mean, we're doing that presently. Finding the right pharmacy for the right indication, for the right protocol, with the right patient population, to drastically improve recruitment. And so that's our proprietary platform to help that relationship. So it isn't like the sponsor now has to go out and see 23,000. Like we're saying, come to us. We'll get you connected to 23,000 pharmacies. So that's the sales pitch. I'll move on. Sorry. Next question.
Okay. Do you have statistics of how many independent research sites utilize a pharmacist's skills throughout their clinical trials?
And Tina?
Sure. That would be a very interesting statistic to have as far as the sites utilizing pharmacists in their studies currently. We do not have that data set, but if you know of somebody that does, I'd be interested to learn more.
Yeah. I'd like just like
okay,
that.
Great.
Based on the regulations, especially if they're going to start shipping stuff to patients home, they have to have the pharmacist involved. I mean, the practice of pharmacy, even state requires dispensing of investigational drugs to follow state laws. And so I'm guessing all sites have their pharmacists involved, directly or indirectly. So I'm assuming that number is going to be pretty high. A pharmacist already involved in, like I said, in that one slide, 23,000 academic and hospital, those pharmacists are absolutely involved. Except we don't really ever see them publicly as much, unless we're in the hospital. So I hope that helps. Again, I wish we had that number. Again, we could use that for our slide decks.
Okay, our next question is, do pharmacists have the time to do this?
Jen, Dr. Schlecht, if you want to take that.
Sure. Yes, they do. Pharmacists are very, very resourceful with their time and their efforts, and certainly participating in clinical research is a priority. They have become very adept, again, at the roles of dispensing, patient counseling, and all of the other myriad of roles that they play within their businesses. And I think they do a very good job of utilizing their team where appropriate, and just really taking advantage of the what's before them in utilizing their qualifications and their leadership amongst their team. Gerald, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I think this is very important. So 2 years ago, when we thought about this, about incorporating the practice of pharmacy, really going after this and starting to say, like, what are the barriers? You know, I went to some of the organizations, and the first thing they said is, this sounds great, but it must be part of their daily routine, because they're running full tilt, most of them. And the community pharmacies, that's where we're after community pharmacies, they're running full tilt, not just dispensing, but with the 12 other services, 14 other services that I mentioned for their community. And so as we started to look into it, to go step by step about, okay, you know, let's look at how would you look at your patient population? What tools do you have? How would we refer patients? How do we recruit patients? What about e-consent? What about portals? You know, as we went step by step, we realized this is what we are so excited about. They're already doing all this stuff, except they call it by another name sometimes. Other than most of the pharmacists we go to know exactly what we're talking about. And so most of what we're looking at works right into their day-to-day operations. And of course, like anything, you know, I think that answers the question. So I think that's a great question. And Tina, thanks. And I just wanted to add that.
Okay, great. We have time for one more question, but we have had a lot of great questions today. We couldn't get to them all, but we'll try our best to get back to everyone who submitted personally after the webinar. So our last question is, are pharmacist-led trials just another added cost? Fascinating
added cost. Where do I start? What I want to say before, if this is the last question you're coming in, please, through LinkedIn, through our website, reach out to Tina, Yoav, anyone, the team members, if you have further questions, want to know more. So as I think about that, like you look at this and say, wait a minute, this is just an added cost, because the way we're presenting ourselves is, yes, this is an additional service, right? We're adding the pharmacist to the triad. But if you listen to all the slides as we went through this in 5 minutes, and you really take a look at it and understand the commoditization, the costs are embedded into the services that are out there. So it's like when I say that, yes, we're going to be competing against services that are done, you know, at the clinical sites or at CROs or recruiting companies. But our goal is, and really our absolute goal is to decrease costs. So I want to say, Tina, when you were doing the CTRP, I know clients saw your counseling as an added cost until both drugs got approved, and then it was like, where do we sign up? And I can see why it would be perceived as an added cost, but with everything we're doing, we're actually looking to replace costs item by item that the pharmacist is responsible for. So like I just said, with you know, direct-to-patient, you know, we could talk about the direct-to-patient cost, that $200 all in, and the rule of thumb is like if your product costs, you know, $100 for the bottle, finished bottle, if it's under $100, stay to your traditional, you know, and of course not direct-to-patient, just stay to your traditional CDD site. But if it's more than $100, you have to move to the direct-to-patient model. And so it's going to be those things. There's going to be, like everybody says, it's not an all or nothing. And so step by step about where you want to reducing costs, for what the pharmacist is responsible for, I see it reducing cost, not adding cost. And I don't mean perceived cost. Once your drug's approved, you're going to make so much a day. No. I mean like your direct cost today. If it costs you $100, I believe it's going to cost $75 with us. That's the cost I'm talking about. So I hope that answered the question. And I see right now we're right at an hour, so I'll be quiet and thanks everybody.
Great. Thank you all for attending this Fierce Biotech webinar and submitting so many great questions. I'd like to thank our speakers for participating and RXE2 for presenting today's webinar. This webinar has been recorded. You'll be able to access the recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining. We look forward to seeing you at future events.